There is a story in the Old Testament that, to be honest, is one of the most unsettling in the entire Bible. Some might even consider it the worst event in Scripture. This episode is found in chapters 19 to 21 of the book of Judges. Many know the passage from chapter 19, but few continue until the end. I believe this story, although disturbing, offers valuable lessons we need to understand. First, let's explore the narrative in a detailed and intense way, and then reflect on the teachings we can draw from it. Let's go together to Judges chapter 19, verse 1. In those days Israel lived without a king, and there was a Levite residing in a mountainous region in Ephraim. He took as a concubine a woman from Bethlehem in Judah. It's important to note that the Levite lived in the north while the woman was in the south. After a while, this woman was unfaithful and left him, returning to her father's house in Bethlehem, where she stayed for about 4 months. When he learned she had gone back to her father's house, the Levite decided to go after her. He traveled from Ephraim to the south to Bethlehem, determined to bring her back. When he arrived, he was warmly received by the woman's father, who welcomed him with hospitality. Several times the Levite tried to leave with his wife, but his father-in-law insisted he stay one more night. This situation repeated until, after several days, the Levite decided it was time to leave. He thanked him for his hospitality and set out on the return journey with the woman. However, the return trip is where events take a tragic turn. As they cross the territory, traveling from the south of Israel towards the north, they arrived near the city of Jebus. The servants suggested they spend the night there, but the Levite refused, preferring to go to Gibeah, where he expected to be welcomed by an Israelite. When they arrived in Gibeah, no one offered them shelter, an unexpected fact given the importance of hospitality in Israelite culture. Later, at dusk, an old man found them in the square and, learning they had no place to stay, invited them into his home. The Levite accepted the offer immediately, assuring the host that they had provisions and only needed a place to rest. They settled in and seemed safe, but then something terrible happened. A group of men from the city surrounded the house, demanding that the Levite be handed over to them so they could abuse him. This act of perversion and violence reveals the degraded state of Gibeah. The host, in a strange gesture, tried to pacify the men by offering them his own daughter and the Levite's concubine to prevent them from attacking his guest. When the men rejected the offer, the Levite, in desperation, handed his concubine over to them. The men raped her all night long. At dawn they released her, and she, gravely injured, managed to return to the door of the Levite's house, where she collapsed. The following morning, upon opening the door, the Levite found his concubine fallen, her hands on the threshold. He called her to get up and continue the journey, but she didn't respond. She had lost her life after the night of abuse. In a shocking act, he placed her body on his donkey and continued his way back home. When he arrived, he made a disturbing decision. He divided the woman's body into 12 parts and sent each part to the tribes of Israel, drawing attention to the atrocity committed by his own compatriots, the tribe of Benjamin. This act had repercussions across the entire nation. The tribes were horrified by what had happened, something unprecedented since the Exodus from Egypt. Indignation and perplexity filled the people who gathered to discuss how to react. This tragedy led to a civil war between the tribes of Israel and the tribe of Benjamin, resulting in thousands of deaths on both sides. The episode ended with the tribe of Benjamin nearly wiped out, leaving only 600 men. Faced with this situation, the other tribes began to fear that one of their own tribes would disappear. Without women to marry and perpetuate the lineage, The continuity of Benjamin was threatened, so the tribes devised a solution. They attacked a clan and took 400 women to give to the men of Benjamin. Even so, 200 men remained without wives. To resolve this issue, the Israelites came up with another controversial solution. During a festival, they allowed the men of Benjamin to abduct women to marry, which technically would not break the vow of the tribes not to give their daughters to the Benjaminites. These episodes reinforce the impact of wrong decisions, and how one bad decision can lead to others that are equally tragic. The consequences of the choices made by Israel directly affected innocent lives, which had nothing to do with the evil acts that triggered this war. Now, let's reflect on some lessons from this story. The first lesson is that the absence of responsibility can lead us to make serious mistakes. The opening verse that says there was no king in Israel at that time illustrates how a lack of leadership and accountability triggered disorderly and morally corrupt behavior among the people. When there is no one to answer to, we tend to make impulsive decisions without considering the consequences. The second lesson we learn is the importance of treating every human being with dignity, recognizing that everyone bears the image of God. In the account, the host suggested offering his own daughter and the concubine to protect his guest, underestimating the value of these women's lives. This example reminds us that we must honor the worth and dignity of all people, and avoid the temptation to objectify or dehumanize others. The third lesson is the danger of drifting away from God. The book of Judges shows Israel's gradual decline as they stray from divine principles. The climax of this decay occurs in the final chapters, reflecting how distance from God can lead to unimaginable actions. The farther we drift from God, the more vulnerable we are to error. Another lesson is that the consequences of bad choices are inevitable and often impact more than we could imagine. Although the sin committed by some Benjaminites was horrific, the decision of the tribes to retaliate led to the death of numerous innocents and caused widespread suffering. Every decision we make has repercussions that we cannot fully control. Finally, even in the midst of failure and destruction, we see a manifestation of God's grace. Despite the severe consequences, God allowed the tribe of Benjamin to rebuild, and Israel restructured itself after these events. The final phrase of the book of Judges summarizes the entire story. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Each person did what seemed right in their own eyes. May we learn the importance of our decisions, knowing that each choice has a lasting weight.